Hi, this is Amelia. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about supervision, clinical supervision, and looking after yourself. So let's think first of all about the idea of burnout, which has been called a state of physical and emotional exhaustion, lack of concern for the job, and a low trust of others. It's also thought about as a depersonalization of others, clients, patients, a loss of caring and cynicism, and C, self-deprecation, low morale, and a deep sense of failure. Now, there are a number of issues around burnout at the moment. I'm going to just look at the individual side of it first, but then I will also have a look at the other side of burnout where we might see that as a fault of the system. Let's stay with the individual for now, though, and let me move on to slide 3. Now here, this is something that I've developed, and you can see that there are 4 domains in this, and we've got 2 continua. We've got a continua which is of neglecting the self and looking after the self. So at the top there, that's when you're able to look after yourself very well, and the bottom is when you're neglecting yourself. And then looking along this domain here, crossing it with this domain here, the one of looking after others and neglecting others. Now, I work in health professions, and so clearly we've often got people who look after others extremely well, and sometimes not so well on themselves. So then what I look at is domain A, looking after the self and looking after others. And if you're good at both, then I'm giving you a gold star. Okay, although it's a grey star on this picture because the picture's gold. You get a gold star. And what I argue there is that if you're doing both very well, that's really the ideal place to be, okay, in one's professional life. So you're doing well in looking after yourself, and it might be argued that if you are taking good care of yourself, then you're in a much better position to look after others too. Now, if you look at domain B here, which is where my head is at the moment, you can see that there's a little cross there that I put burnout, because here what you're able to do is look after others well, but you've begun to neglect yourself in that process. So I might take the classic sort of nursing scenario or doctor at the front line scenario where they're really taking care of others, but they begin to neglect themselves in that process. So that's what I'd call the sort of red cross area, the burnout area, the domain of burnout. And then if we continue to neglect ourselves, we also begin to neglect others. So we're now looking at our standards dropping. We're in a really low place. We're probably extremely tired, extremely exhausted, depending on the trauma of the situation. We may be mentally and physically at a very low ebb. And really not in a very good position to take care of others either. So that begins to drop too. So when that begins to be let go and we're letting go of ourselves, then we move into what I call domain C, the area of complaints. And that is a dangerous area to get to for obvious reasons. And one wants to avoid that if at all possible. And then domain D, where we look at neglecting others but really looking after yourselves. And in that domain, I ask, well, shouldn't you be in banking? Because obviously that's the job for you. Okay. All right, so thinking about that more seriously then, let's think about how do you look after yourself? And I'm going to start off with a little exercise about values and inspiration. So thinking about where you really get your inspiration. So I want you to think about a person that inspires you. So they might be dead, they might be alive, they could be personal, political, they might be Mickey Mouse, a fantasy, a fairy tale scenario, Robin Hood, or they might be for real. Anyone from your mum to Nelson Mandela. And for me, when I do this exercise, I actually do think about both of those people. My mum on the one hand, and I found her inspirational when she was ill towards the end of her life. She was full of gratitude, she was full of love, right up until the very end. And we were able to be together in a very special way. When I think about Nelson Mandela, I found, when I think about him, his courage, his commitment, his staying power, to spend 27 years in jail for the cause, and that he comes out, he's not bitter, and he's ready to lead his people, despite the fact at this stage being in his 70s. So those two people inspire me. Now, if you then think about the person, the three qualities about that person that really inspire you. So, as I say, for my mother, it might be something like about gratitude, appreciation, stoicism in her illness. If I was to think about Mandela, it might be something like courage, persistence, kind of overall inspiration. Yeah. So I want you to think about a couple of people that really give you inspiration, and make a brief note about that, and maybe discuss that with a partner, somebody in your household, maybe a colleague on the programme. And then I'll talk about part 2 of that, this exercise in a second. I'm going to go through the rest of the slides first, and then I'm going to revisit this exercise, okay? It's because I want you to think about that, and I don't want you to be prejudiced by what I say any further. Just make a note of those qualities that inspire you, and we will revisit that shortly. Okay. Now, another way of looking after yourself, the Mental Health Foundation and Mind did some research to indicate top ways really to keep mentally fit. A bit like, we can keep physically fit by going to the gym, swimming, etc. Top ways to keep mentally fit. Now, I quite like Mind because they actually identified 5 things here, which we can really bear in mind. That we work on connecting with other people, that we always have something new to be learning, that we learn to take notice. I see that as a kind of mindfulness, really. Be in the present, take notice of the beautiful things around us, perhaps think about, some gratitudes, but really taking notice of the present. Being active physically, and giving. So always having somebody in your life that you are giving to. And then the Mental Health Foundation came out with a list of 10, and you can see those on the list there. I also looked at 11 traits from the Psychology Society to increase emotional resilience. So you can see those as well, and I tried to align them as best I could across that table. But thinking about your own well-being, I think if you can distill it down to these 5 areas and do a little self-assessment, to what degree do I keep in touch with friends? Do I connect with people on a regular basis? To what degree am I open to learning new things? To what degree do I stay in the present? To what degree am I active and committed to trying to maintain and develop my physical health? And to what degree do I think about other people? Do I spend some time with them? Do I give to them? Okay, so those are ways that you can think about keeping your mental well-being in tip-top condition. You can rate yourself, think about some strengths, Think about things that you do well in relation to that and areas that you might want to develop and take further. Okay. So I also want you to think about, where do you get your appreciation from? We've looked earlier at inspiration. Where do you get your appreciation? Who appreciates you? Are you with enough people who appreciate you? Do you have enough people who appreciate you in your life? Or is your life full of people who don't really appreciate you, and those who do appreciate you are not in your life? So in which case you might want to take a little look at that. And then if I can just come back to the inspiration exercise that I talked about earlier, I want you to think about those three qualities. And that often what we can do is project those qualities onto other people that we admire and are inspired by, and forget that actually those are also our qualities. So here I'm talking about projection from a sort of positive way, that sometimes we can project out our positive qualities onto other people, and that those qualities that you name, so for example for Mandela I named courage, persistence, sort of general inspiration. For my mother I named gratitude, appreciation, stoicism. Then I need to sort of think about owning those qualities as mine, that I'm actually also projecting those out and that they are my qualities. So when I invite you and challenge you to think about the qualities that you've put out on those people that you admire as actually being part of you. Now, how does that make you feel? What does that make you think? That those qualities are yours, and sit with that. So I invite you to really sit with that, and not bat it away or do anything else, but just sit with it, hold it, and think of those qualities as being yours. And if you invite your friends and those close to you to comment on them, I feel absolutely sure that they will say, oh yes, yeah, those are yours, those are your qualities. Okay. All right, so I'm coming to the end now, supervision and well-being. Now, the other thing that I'd like you to think about in terms of your own supports and stresses in your work and perhaps in your life, where are they? If you think about all of those main elements of your life, where would you say you have the supports locate, and where are the stresses? And of course, they can both be in the same place. Like in work, there are things that stress me, and there are plenty of people that also give me support. So, those two things may be going on, but where's the balance? Am I doing, should I be doing more work that gives me more reward? And so on. Similarly with activities and interests, friends, etc. So consider in relation to those, is it the kind of support you want? Is it enough? What's missing? What support is really essential to maintain? And how could you improve your support system? And then on the other side, how do you recognise you're under stress? What methods do you do to alleviate it? To what extent do they provide relief? Like a classic one here is, we might say, well, I go home and I have a good glass of wine, I feel much better. Well, that's great for the short term, but how really does that work in relation to the long term? Okay, so those are things to think about. And that concludes the well-being element of this presentation. I'm now shortly going to point out some resources in relation to some of the systemic causes of people feeling stressed and perhaps more mentally unwell than they'd like to feel. So let me stop there.